I appreciate him being flexible and on short notice. He is Dave Yost. He is the Attorney General of the state of Ohio. AG Yost, thanks for joining us. I hope you're having a good morning. Are you ready for the NFL to return?
Absolutely. It's not fall without football.
All right, so I am fascinated with this show. Obviously, we have been beating the drum for the return of the Big Ten as aggressively as anybody could be in media. And I'm frustrated that the Big Ten ever made the decision to shut down in the first place. So before I get into the attorney element of your job, as someone who lives in Ohio, like I'm not asking you to put your lawyer hat on yet, does it seem as crazy to you that high school football can be played, that the Browns and the Bengals can play in the NFL, and also that the University of Cincinnati can play, the Bearcats can, but Ohio State, which is probably the most beloved team in the entirety of the state of Ohio, is not able to play? Just purely as a guy who lives in Ohio and as a football fan, does that not seem crazy to you?
It does seem crazy, and it seems crazy to everybody I talk to. Everybody's shaking their head, and it seems just arbitrary. To tell you a very quick story, I was talking to my friend down in Georgia, the Attorney General of Georgia, and we were just talking about how COVID is affecting our states and our offices. And at one point I said, I just can't believe that I'm living in a world where the SEC is playing football and the Big Ten is not. I don't know what's going on here. There's dead silence for a second. And then my buddy Chris Carr down there, great Attorney General, he says, well, I don't see how it's any different than any other year. Which, as a Big Ten guy and a Buckeye alum, made my blood boil. But, let's play football.
So I want to dive now. I'm going to ask you. I always say on my show. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but I'm a lawyer as well, and so I don't practice full time by any stretch of the imagination. But every now and then on the show, I always say, okay, I try to talk to you as a normal person. Now I'll put my lawyer hat on, and we'll have like a more nuanced discussion about this. And again, we're talking to the Attorney General of the great state of Ohio. And look, I never would have believed that I would end up the foremost proponent of Ohio State football being played, because I'm born and raised an SEC fan as well. But it's crazy to me. It's absolutely crazy to me that only three universities, Ohio State, Iowa, and Nebraska, actually voted in favor of playing. We've got an article up on Outkick, which is where I read this initially, and you talked to, I believe, the Columbus Dispatch, which is the local newspaper there in Columbus. Walk me through what kind of claim you believe Ohio State would have, and whether you think the university should sue if the fall football season remains canceled and the school presidents don't reconsider their decision they made a month ago to shut down the season.
Well, I do think Ohio State should sue if that happens. Hopefully it won't. But we've got some good claims here. The first is really obvious. It's a contract claim, and there's a duty implied in every contract of fair dealing. This doesn't feel like that. I mean, if you want to opt out because you feel like COVID's too big of a threat, fine, opt out, don't play. But don't get in the way of the teams that do. And that's one of the effects of where we're at right now, is the Big Ten's using their power to try to prevent those that do want to play from being on the field. There's also a question about tortious interference with business relationships. And, I'm all about the kids, want to see them play. They've worked all their lives to get to this season and have their shot, and it's being taken away from them in an arbitrary way. But let's not forget that this is also business, and there's money involved, lots of money. $10 million to tens of millions of dollars in revenue. And it's not just football, but that money, as you know, Clay, supports all of the other sports that don't make any money. So all those kids are getting hit by this too, including women's sports and the Title IX mandated programs. So this is a big deal. There's a lot of equities involved here, but it comes down to contracts and torts, first year law school.
Yeah, okay, so contracts and torts, and we're talking with the Attorney General of the state of Ohio. I appreciate him coming on with us. His name is Dave Yost. You can follow him on Twitter at Yost for Ohio. I will tweet out his Twitter handle here in a little bit.
Thank you.
Okay, so I want to dive into these claims to a certain extent. There has been a lot of discussion, and I'm sure you have followed this, over how and whether, for instance, there was a vote that took place to allow the season to be canceled. For a long time, the Big Ten wouldn't say anything. Then they get sued by the 8 Nebraska players. Suddenly they come out and they say, yes, there was a vote. It was an 11-3 vote in favor of canceling the season. As an attorney general, would you like to see the minutes of that meeting to see whether or not the vote complied with existing Big Ten bylaws? Have you begun, should there be an investigation into what kind of vote took place, whether it was appropriate, proper under existing state laws, not only in Ohio, but other states as well, considering we're talking about 13 different state institutions, only Northwestern is a private school. There are a lot of state-related issues, as you mentioned, that could be involved in a lawsuit involving this decision.
Well, that's right. And my team has already started collecting documents and reviewing them. A key question is the bylaws or the code of regulations or constitution of the Big Ten. That's not publicly available. And so, obviously that is a key element in assessing whether a meeting was properly called or whether the vote was properly taken or whether this committee actually has the legal authority to do what they did. We're researching that. But I think there's some, based on what we've seen so far, I've got some substantial questions. I think we've got a pretty good case here.
Yeah, okay, so I'm fascinated by this, and I've gotten asked this question a lot, and what would happen? We know that Ohio State, we know that Iowa, and we know that Nebraska want to play. What would happen if Ohio State said, hey, we're playing a game at the Shoe on October 3rd or October 10th? I saw Jim Harbaugh come out and say Michigan's ready to play in 2 weeks. What would happen if these individual schools said, we believe we have the contractual right to play? In fact, we believe we have the contractual obligation to play. What would happen if Ohio State just said, hey, we're playing. Iowa, you're welcome to show up on October 3rd. Hey, Michigan, we'll play you. We want to make sure that we play that game. Hey, Nebraska, we want to play. How would somebody be able to stop them from playing if they just said, we're going to show up? And as a Attorney General of Ohio, how would you assess that decision?
Well, isn't that a whole bunch of can of worms right there?
I mean, it's like a law school hypothetical, right, for those of us who have been into law school. But I'm just saying, like, who's going to stop? If Ryan Day came out and he said, we think, based on potentially consultation with lawyers at Ohio State that I'm sure you would have talked to, we think in the state of Ohio that the Big Ten does not have the authority to cancel our season. We think we have obligations and responsibilities based on all the contracts that we've signed, whether it's like local radio contracts, whether it's, all the different obligations that individual universities have. Who would be there to stop Ohio State from playing a football game in the Shoe if they elected to do it?
So it's a really complicated question. I don't mean to dodge it, except that I just don't have enough information to be able to you assumed some things. There's other things we would have to assume as well. For example, how would you try to stop it?
Yeah,
I mean, one of the ways
is somebody going to arrest Ryan Day for showing up at the stadium if Ohio State's allowing him to play? I mean, it's a fascinating question, right? I don't think that police officer would be very popular in the state of Ohio if he tried to arrest the Ohio State football team as they entered the stadium.
But I will tell you, I'm delighted to hear that after all these years, Jim Harbaugh thinks that with 2 more weeks, he'll finally be ready to have Michigan ready to play.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I mean, he's probably still going to lose to Ohio State again, but I at least respect the fact that he's willing to play. But, I mean, isn't that a fascinating question? In other words, if you think about the political capital here, if the Big Ten coaches, and it seems pretty clear that they want to play, and the Big Ten ADs just said, hey, we're playing, I would love to see what the reaction would be. Are the universities going to sue to stop them from playing? I mean, and certainly at a place like Ohio State where they want to play, or Nebraska or Iowa, like I already said, where they voted to play, that certainly wouldn't happen. I'm just kind of fascinated to see what might happen there.
It would be fascinating, and who the plaintiff would be, and what their theory would be, and what mechanism they try to use. I think it's hard to argue that you get specific performance in something like that. Probably comes down to money damages, but then you know, what's your place in the league at that point? Does the league say we're going to sit you down, suspend you for a year? But just too many facts we don't know, Clay.
Okay, so, and we're talking to the Attorney General of the state of Ohio. I appreciate him joining us. You can follow him on Twitter. Again, he has been gracious enough to join us. His name is Dave Yost at Yost for Ohio. What kind of conversations do you have with Ohio State? You talked about the procedural posture of what a lawsuit might look like. Ohio State is a state institution. I imagine that you can, as an Attorney General, I would think, sue at times on behalf of the state of Ohio against people who are involved in trying to keep state of Ohio institutions from exercising their constitutional and contractual and tort responsibilities, all these things legally under state of Ohio law. Have you had conversations with people at Ohio State, and how have they responded to the idea of these lawsuits? And who might you sue? I'm assuming the Big Ten. Might you sue other institutions that are choosing not to play? How would this procedural posture work?
So, first of all, we are doing our research right now. Eventually, because we don't have a final decision yet, this could be mooted out. They could decide to do the right thing.
Do you think they will, by the way, before we get into that? Do you think that the Big Ten –
I don't know.
Do you think they should, based on what you've seen so far legally?
Absolutely, they should.
Not just as a fan, but also legally, you think they should come back and reassess the decision?
Well, and in terms of the safety of the thing, as you pointed out,
yeah.
At the top of our discussion, this is being done in high school. This is being done in the NFL. This is being done in other sports and other leagues, other conferences. So, we know more now, and hopefully they will reconsider that decision. If they choose not to, and it doesn't go, not only do I think Ohio State ought to sue the Big Ten, but I think the universities that got in the way should individually be sued and invited to the party. Again, those tens of millions of dollars, that wasn't through any fault of Ohio State. Obviously, it wasn't absolutely necessary. If there's a tornado and it blows down the stadium, you can't have a game. You can't have a season. You don't have a place to play. It's force majeure and legal talk. That's not what's going on here, because there's lots and lots of sports being played. So we think that the people that unreasonably and arbitrarily got in the way of Ohio State being able to fulfill its contracts and play its season ought to have to pick up the tab for that economic loss.
Well, this is kind of wild. So in theory, you not just sue the Big Ten, but Ohio State could sue Michigan, Wisconsin, Penn State, schools whose presidents voted not to play. They would theoretically be on the hook potentially, not only for the damages that they're having to face from not playing, but for keeping schools like Ohio, Iowa, Ohio State, Iowa, and Nebraska from playing as well.
That's where I want to go. Now, at the end of the day, I have a client, and they have to make a decision based on lots and lots of facts, not just the legal case. And I respect that. I'm not the policy guy. I'm the lawyer. But I think the law is there, and the option is available if they want to take it.
Have you mentioned earlier talking to the Attorney General from the state of Georgia, and him taking a shot at the Big Ten not playing, which is vintage college football. But and by the way, in the state of Mississippi, I don't know if you saw that, like they put up on the highways on the day that college football started, like don't stay home like the Big Ten is or whatever, which is really funny for people down in the South where I live. Yeah. But have you talked to other attorney generals, let's say in Iowa and in Nebraska, about your theory of the case? Because in theory, if it applies in Ohio, and I know state regulations and laws can be a little bit different across state lines, but in theory, your argument for Ohio State suing, the same logic would apply in the states of Nebraska and Iowa. who also are having the same impact as you in terms of other schools voting to disallow them to play, while a lot of other football events are going on in their states.
Yeah, and those conversations haven't happened yet. And again, I continue to hope that the Big Ten will do the right thing. But those conversations will occur if this thing becomes ripe for a decision.
Who makes the decision at Ohio State about whether or not to file the lawsuit?
Well, I think the president, the AD, and the board of trustees will all probably want to weigh in and get a consensus on that.
Does it seem crazy to you as a lawyer who's looking at the data and everything else that effectively whether football can happen seems in many ways to be reflected by what the governor's political party is? I mean, most of the country, if you have a Republican governor, you're playing high school football and college football. And most of the state,
you are not going to get me to go there.
That's crazy, though, right? As an attorney general, isn't it crazy that based on whether the governor has a D or an R behind his name is dictating whether or not?
We lost you there.
Yeah. All right, we've got the attorney general. Last question for you, Attorney General Yost. He's at Yost for Ohio. What is the next step? What's the time frame here on your behalf? Like, obviously, it's a big deal whether or not Ohio State and the other Big Ten schools are able to play sooner rather than later because they'd like to be a part of the fall college football season. When in your mind does this decision have to be made in terms of lawsuits and also in terms of just the time frame here?
Well, the logistics of the season and weather. Remember, a lot of I think every one of the Big Ten stadiums is an open air stadium. So weather eventually becomes an issue. We're probably in a position where the next couple of weeks the decision needs to be made about whether there's going to be a season at the Big Ten. Now, as far as when can we sue, we've got a little more room on that. I mean, we could sue next year for that matter, but I would be obviously for moving forward as quickly as we can. These things take time and effort to do, and I would want to get the money back to Ohio State so that it can get back to funding all those other programs that student athletes rely on.
I appreciate your time, Attorney General. He is Dave Yost at Yost for Ohio on Twitter. He is the Attorney General of the state of Ohio. Thank you for coming on with us and discussing this. And please
Good to talk with you.
Let us know as this process plays out. We may want you to come on again and discuss what you've learned or what your plans are.
Sounds good. Go Bucks.